Good day, and welcome to another episode of Three Guys and the Word. My name is Andrew Omer, and it is great to be with you once again. As always, I'm joined by both Chris Miller and Eric Parker. We're evangelists in the Louisville, Kentucky area, and we are concluding our discussion in the book of Ecclesiastes. And we hope that what we have talked about has not only been beneficial to us, but it's been beneficial and challenging, hopefully, in some areas. If you've been keeping up, we encourage, if there's some episodes that you haven't seen, or if this is your first episode that you're tuning into, check out the other episodes where we have gone through this book and really had great discussions on what we believe Solomon's had to say, being inspired by the Holy Spirit to write down some great wisdom for us, and just a lot of practical wisdom that is for our daily lives. And it's not only what's beneficial for the original audience, but of course, still beneficial to us. But looking forward to concluding our discussion. And as always, just like to say good morning to both Eric and Chris. And this morning we'll start with Eric. How are you doing?
I'm good. I have aired my grievances to Chris and Andrew, so and gotten on my soapbox, or my soapboxes. So I am doing good. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you two gentlemen, and it's always a pleasure to discuss biblical things, especially books like Ecclesiastes, which have, um, they're just so real and sort of like Ecclesiastes, I would say, is even kind of like raw. Like, it's just somebody saying, look, if you don't have God in your life, then you might as well just jump off a bridge. Like that's kind of like Solomon's approach. Like he's just no holds barred. You need God in your life to have any sense of value at all. And he just doesn't beat around the bush, which is, I think, it's refreshing when I read Ecclesiastes. I like somebody who can be a straight shooter. So hopefully that's come across in a good sense. Chris, how you doing, man?
We fixed all the world's problems before we started the episode, so we're in good shape. Now we're going to fix more problems that have to do with our souls. So it's a good episode. I'm looking forward to it. It's like I told these guys, it's been a joy to go through Ecclesiastes, probably one of my favorite books. And it's not because I'm a cynical person, but like Eric said, it's a real book. It's something I think that no matter how old you get or how long you've been a Christian, or even if you're not a Christian, you can look at and relate to a lot of the things Solomon talks about. So, looking forward to finally seeing Solomon figure this out at the end of the book. Um, but as I've said before, with the study of this book, he knew the answer all along. So, looking forward to wrapping it up. How you doing, Andrew?
Well, the more we talk about like what we talked about previous to getting things going, it's like we have to do a pre-show of the show. The more we just put that out there, but it's good to be among you, as I mentioned, and I always appreciate the comments. It gets me to think, and not just be solely focused in on my ideas, because I think that quite often we can run into that trouble of our thoughts are the only thoughts that matter, or they're right, or hey, this is a good idea, or this is the best idea. And so when we get uh, to especially looking at scriptures, if we have some uh, good thought provoking discussion, it's quite valuable, and that's why we should never pass up the opportunity to open up God's word and really sink our teeth in and dig deep into and question, okay, is my thought in line with scripture? Are other people getting what I'm getting out of a passage? And if I'm way off base, maybe I should, or if people are getting totally different than what I am, I might be thinking about, well, does it truly mesh with what I'm thinking with what scripture? So I'm just glad that we're being challenged through this study, and hopefully if you've been watching, you've been challenged in areas of the way you look at scripture. Maybe you never looked at scripture, and we just continue to encourage, open up your Bibles, and don't just take our word for it. Do your study, do your research. We're all commanded to do such. So that's my little soapbox. All right. So why don't we'll get to our principal verses in just a moment, but just take a moment to, as we always do, just to kind of reflect a moment or two on what we took away from our previous episode. And Eric, what were some of the thoughts from verses 1 through 8 of chapter 12 that really, when we talked last time or since then, that just really hit home to you or stood out for you?
Well, definitely one of the things is that chapter divisions are awful. At the end of chapter 11 goes right in the beginning of chapter 12. I mean, we have to start and begin in certain places just logistically for time's sake. So you need something to sort of you don't need, but I guess it's helpful to facilitate something like that. So we're bridging over to this idea of in chapter 12, verses 1 through 8, this idea of don't forget God when the going is good. When you're young, when you've got good energy, things seem to be going well with you. You're sort of figuring things out, or you're pushing for changes that have needed to be enacted for a long time, and finally you're getting momentum. Don't forget God and the sort of momentum of life when you're moving forward and you're progressing and you've got a lot going for you. Don't forget God in that. Of course, youth to old age being a part of that. As you become older, again, your body starts to break down. You have more of your friends start dying, and you sort of experienced more of the lulls in life, more of the challenges in life, typically by the time you're older, the heartache of, children rebelling against you, or grandchildren doing things that you would otherwise not want them to do. Sort of almost like the expansion of family and friends that naturally happens in life, in the retraction of that for various reasons. You go through a lot of cycles of that when you're by the time you're old. So and don't become cynical. But there are challenges in life and things that you got to be aware of. And there's of course all those metaphorical references to like your teeth are falling out of your mouth, your ears are kind of stopped up, your eyes aren't as good as they used to be. Isaac was a classic example of that in the book of Genesis. Just things that don't work like they used to, and remember God in the good times, so that when the difficult times come, then you'll think of him as well. And then verse 8, his kind of thesis for the whole book: vanity of vanities, says a preacher, all is vanity. So we're reminded of this. Without God in our lives, it's almost like all the potential goodness of things is just stripped out. It's just ripped out of everything. A marriage is just a piece of paper. Money is the same thing. It's just a piece of paper. A house is just a box that's going to break down once the weather and the elements break it down. Children and grandchildren are going to take the funds that you've left them and just splurge and blow them on all kinds of things. So unless you have God in your life, it's just vanity. Which, from that one side, you could say, well, that's pretty cynical. That's pretty dark. But the whole point is to actually take the darkness away by saying something like that. It is to say, don't pour yourself into these things because they're meaningless. What you need to do is make a change and pursue God, and then things do have meaning. Your marriage is more than a piece of paper. Money is more than money. Money is a door opener. It's an opportunity for opportunity. It's things you can do that are fun in life, and exhilarating, sort of as like almost like a foreshadowing of things to come. The minor joys of this life can be magnified by the greater joys to come. But if you don't have the greater joys to come, then it's just trivial. So that's kind of my 2 cents, or 3 cents, or 4 cents on that matter. Chris, what about you, man? 12, 1 through 8.
I think it's interesting. Chapter 12, he starts out by saying your creator. And we talked about this last week kind of briefly. You think about it, our very origin, our very existence is dependent on God. We talked, I went back and watched the episode. We were talking about it. As you get older, maybe you see your necessity of God. And a lot of people at times will get more religious as they get older. They'll take it more serious as they get older, whether it's by, experiences they go through, wisdom, whatever it may be. But Solomon talks about remember him in the days of your youth. And like Eric had pointed out, really I guess you could say, poetic language that's used here. He talks about your eyes dimming, your hands trembling, your body breaking down. And as I said last week, older people have a benefit that younger people a lot of times don't possess. They have more wisdom and knowledge, experiences. So it's not to say that older people are not important about what I'm about to say. But when you're younger, you have more energy, you have more opportunities usually. You just by statistical values, you're going to have more people you come across as a younger person than as an older person if you live a normal life at expectancy. So if you have God in your life from a beginning stage, think of how many different people are impacted by that. Solomon asked God for wisdom on how to lead the people. So he invited God in as he's beginning as a king when he's young, but he departs from God as a young person. And then as he gets older, it seems he's trying to get back in fellowship with God. I almost wonder if a lot of this is written out of regret. If he goes through and writes this and says, these are things I didn't do, these are things I wish I would have done better, learn from my mistakes, learn from my shortcomings. But you think about it, really the main takeaway from Ecclesiastes to me is invite God in during every season, every time, every opportunity of life, have God be involved. God is not more valuable as you get older. God is just as valuable when you're younger. You just may not see it. And living a life with God in it is so much more rewarding. Like Eric, you pointed out, you see money differently, you see marriage differently, you see people differently, you see suffering differently, you see opportunities differently. And Solomon, I know, would have not had all the shortcomings and fallings that he had if he would have had God in his life, if he would have invited God in to every aspect of his life. But he didn't, and none of us have at all times. So I love the book. I love the fact that you can kind of, like I pointed out last week, you sit down, you talk to an older person that's been through things, and you're like, wow, all this wisdom you have, all these experiences you have. When I read the book of Ecclesiastes, that's how I feel. I feel like I'm setting, weird metaphor, I guess. You're sitting on a back porch in a rocking chair with Solomon. Solomon's just talking through all these things he's been through, maybe all the mistakes he made. And you can go read other texts that you can see these things happen. Um, and basically, I could almost hear him telling me, don't do what I did. Because, like Eric said, kind of the whole statement of Ecclesiastes, which made me laugh last week when we read it, vanity of all vanities, all is vanity. It's like, come on, man, why are you being so negative? But he's not. He's showing that without God, it is meaningless. There is no point. So it's important to remember your creator at all stages in life. I know I kind of ran around a bunch, but that's really the main thing I get from this book, and really all books of the scriptures, to remember God, invite God into your life. What you got, Andrew?
Well, as we've gone through a journey, and that's what it's been through these 12 chapters. That's what the book has been. It's been a journey, as if, in one sense, Solomon, as we get the feel that he's sharing his life story and his experiences. And one, if they just picked up chapter 12, they would think that he was a Debbie Downer, because, man, you're all depressing, all doom and gloom, and but it's a reality of life. It's like when, after waking up from, or when you get up in the morning, and as you age, uh, your joints will start to creak and make noises. They saying like, "How is that even possible?" And not that I've ever had any experience, even though I'm old as dirt. It's from what I've been told. No one in this group here says such things about me, but I digress.
Chris?
Yeah. But anyway, uh, he's being real, and he's just being honest. This is the way life goes. You start off with vigor and you have strength. Those things go away. It's part of that progression in life, part of that journey in life. And ultimately, you will leave this earth. You will return as you were created. And he references, you kind of see, calling back to the very beginning of Genesis, when the first man was created from the dust of the earth. And his original audience should connect with that and relate to, hey, that calls back to their very beginning of what happened with the first man. And he's directed, as we've talked about, directed people to God. Remember, hey, you're only here for a really relatively short period, and it can be doom and gloom. And the days that are bright are relatively few. And there's going to be part of those days that are going to be really dark, and you're not going to find enjoyment. However, even when it comes to be your time to depart this world, remember where your spirit goes to. And so it's a very subtle way, but it's one of those uh, uh, wise is, I'm trying to think of a better word, but you just see his wisdom is how he just directs people to God, and just try to get them to think of, okay, how are you living right now? Are you going to live in such a way that you're going to end up being in the presence of God? Uh, are you living in such a way where you have that relationship with God? Think about God. And I like how he is just shifting people's focus. Get away from this under the sun, and focus in on the eternal and heavenly. And that's what we're really going to think about and ponder in on as we close the rest of this book. So, but before that, go ahead and remind us, if you would, Chris, of our principal verses.
The principal verses for these studies has been Romans chapter 10, verses 14 through 15. It says, "How then shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? How shall they believe in him whom they have not heard? How shall they hear without a preacher? And how shall they preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the gospel of peace, who bring glad tidings of good things."
All right. And that is pretty good segue. And go ahead and read, if you would, Eric, verses 9 and 10.
Ecclesiastes 12, 9 through 10. In addition to being a wise man, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, and he pondered and searched out and arranged many proverbs. The preacher sought to find delightful words and to write words of truth correctly. Um, Pretty positive here. Sort of speaking in the third person, which sometimes can put you off a little bit, but he's speaking in the third person. This is definitely in line with how Solomon is described elsewhere, of penning proverbs and writing proverbs. First Kings talks about that, and some of the successes and collections of wisdom that he put together for the people. Um, a couple, I guess, general principles here. Um, a preacher's role is to inform and encourage and incite. Inform, encourage, and incite. You want to inform the people of what God's will is for them. You want to encourage them to pursue that will and to, in a sense, discourage them from rebelling against that. You want to incite them to action. You want to stir them up. And so, Solomon's goal wasn't just to, make a book and put it on a shelf somewhere. He wanted to codify things that were going to be shared with people. And so that just goes to show for Andrew, myself, and Chris, and any other preachers, anybody who fills the pulpit, anybody who teaches, anybody who's in a position where they're sort of sharing that information, not just to share the information. Now, you want to do a wholehearted job in doing that, but you want to encourage and incite as well. You want to storm the will, as D. Bowman used to say. Storm the will. That's what preaching is. So a couple things there. And then I like how the New American Standard phrases it: the preacher sought to find delightful words and to write words of truth correctly. We don't think of wisdom as delightful. That's probably not the first adjective you think of when you think of wisdom. But that's something that we should be delighting ourselves in. That's Proverbs' emphasis, is to delight yourself in the caresses of Lady Wisdom, to use that personification that is used in Proverbs, to delight yourself in her embrace rather than to sort of pleasure yourself in folly, in the woman of folly. So just surround yourself in wisdom, and what you surround yourself with and who you surround yourself with is going to have major repercussions in your life. So surround yourself with wisdom, and use the knowledge of the ancestors. Use the wisdom of the ancestors. There's no inherent virtue in being like a nonconformist. There's no inherent virtue in being a nonconformist. Now, there's no inherent virtue in following traditionalism blindly either. But time has often proven that ancient wisdom and conventional wisdom has merit to it. So those are the sorts of things that we want to not just dismiss offhand, but maybe pay attention to the sort of wisdom that's been handed down by the gray-headed, and see if there's something there that's good and wholesome, because 9 times out of 10 there will be. Chris?
Well, I think you think of the context of where we left off last week, the wording that Solomon uses, verse 7 specifically: the dust will return to the earth as it was, the spirit will return to the God who gave it. That's a very wise thing to say, to call that to your mind. We're so carnally minded at times we forget that part, and Solomon's calling us to that, to think about that, which I think is a interesting thing that he says he was wise. He teaches the people knowledge, like Eric said. When we get up to preach, it's important that we're doing it to give people information that can help them. And depending on your audience, you may have to do that in different ways. Some people are on different levels than others, which I think at times makes it difficult when we preach, because you may have someone in the audience that's more advanced than someone else, but it's trying to always give everybody something they can use to help them. And you see that he pondered and he sought out. So like Solomon was thinking deeply on these things and seeking out things that he could use to help people. So it's not like, you fly by the seat of your pants type of thing. Solomon really thought this through, was really looking for things that he could use to help people. And then, like, Erica pointed out, him writing Proverbs. there's a ton of stuff in there that we could take. And like I've said about Ecclesiastes, Proverbs is the same way. No matter how old you are, no matter how long you've been a Christian, no matter where you are in life, a lot of the Proverbs you can read and be like, yeah, I can get something from this. Which, as I said, Solomon had all these probably different types of interactions with people from different cultures and different environments, especially what we've learned about him as we've gone through the book, that he might have taken cultural things from other people. While this is fascinating, teaches it to the people of Israel as well. But then verse 10, I think, is what's to me the most important. Find acceptable words. What was written was upright words of truth. That's the most important thing. And like we've read throughout the book, like Eric said, I like what Eric had said. The book's kind of raw. Like Solomon's not wanting to make you feel good when you read Ecclesiastes. I mean, some of the things he says, it's like, wow, you're just an angry person. You're just upset. But a lot of it's kind of like in your face type of stuff. You're going to return to the dust that you came from, no matter what you have right now, no matter where you think you are. Without God, you're nothing. Life is meaningless without God. And that's extremely true. What we've read throughout this book has been hard at times. It's been conflicting at times. It's been convicting at times, I would say, but it's true and it's meant to help. And I know you guys probably have had this happen too. You get up and you talk about a subject that may bother somebody. It's sometimes obviously we're supposed to tell the truth, but sometimes you're pulled in the direction, I'll water this down a little bit. That's not the way this book is written. That's not the way the Proverbs are written either. Solomon is in a lot of ways a straight shooter, which is important. Um, and that's the thing. I think you can balance it. Beautiful language throughout a lot of this, very educated language throughout a lot of this, and the truth at the same time. So Solomon's not like polishing it up to make it, where it slides underneath. You can get it, but it's polished enough where you're like, wow, what an eloquent person to write this. And I really didn't think of it that way till Eric had brought it up. Now I want to go through and read Ecclesiastes and be like, okay, how can I use this as an evangelist with my messages? How can I be that straightforward? How can I be that on point? Solomon the preacher, man. I'd love to sit and hear some sermons from him too. What you got, Andrew?
It's said that if we look at this with clear-headed, an open mind to really be willing to listen to what it has to instruct us, we could see like how empty a lot of what we say, what comes forth from our own mouths, how empty they really are, especially in our culture. Just in general, we just produce a lot of words that don't need to be said. We're so quick to whatever comes in our mind to just spew it out. And here it takes due diligence into seeking to put down what needs to be said, instead of, well, I want to say this regardless of what people may think. And also, it just makes me think of, when we think of wise people today, a lot of what they have to say is to stroke their own ego. And here he's genuinely seeking to enrich people and not enrich himself. And that's totally not the way the world is today, by and large. You're seeking to just be uplifted. I'll give you this information in order to receive praise. I have not your own best interests at heart. In these two verses, he has your best interest. Above all, this is part of the mind of God that's being revealed to us. And that's the most powerful that we should consider. This is part of God's thoughts that he wants us to understand. We are to take great consideration in what we speak and what we say. This is just reinforcing the whole factor of the importance of our words that's used throughout the word of God, of the importance of be careful of what you say, how you say it, when to talk, when to remain silent. Make sure what you have to say is for the benefit of others. Don't be just thinking about yourself. This is part of being selfless, getting outside of yourself, thinking about other people. We tend to be at least in again our society, me-centric. We are the center of the universe. Everything revolves around us. At the end of this section, as we're saying, no, you're not. And you can imagine Solomon just waking up one day and realizing, you know what? I've wasted all of this time partying, enjoying riches, abusing the gift of the wisdom that God has given me. I've had all this stuff I've not shared. I've not taken time to give back. I need to start doing that, and I'm gonna do that now. So it just says we've kind of reflecting and kind of imagine what Solomon was doing. That's what I kind of see. He's having like an aha moment of eventually he woke up one day and says, you know what? I'm gonna start really thinking how I can serve instead of being served. And it's just one way of using our words. And our words are powerful. I mean, James really talks about that, of how powerful our words are. Don't take for granted what we can say, and we should not abuse our speech. All right, Chris, 11 and 12, if you would.
The words of the wise are like goads, and the words of scholars are like well-driven nails given by one shepherd. And further, my son, be admonished by these. Of making many books, there is no end, and much study is wearisome to the flesh. So you think about, once again, here we go, kind of metaphors that he uses uh, with goads. I think of like a point, like pointing someone along, and then nails. A well-driven nail has some type of direction to it. Solomon's teaching wasn't with just, oh, let me use all these weird metaphors to draw you in. There was a point to all of it. There was a direction to all of it. And you think about a lot of what he writes throughout the book, he kind of shows you that there is no point and there is no direction of a life without God. Constantly striving after the wind, constantly feeling like you're not going anywhere. A life with God always has point and direction. And his teaching in the Proverbs that he writes as well had point and direction to drive someone to God, to see their need from God. And then he talks about at the end of verse 11 that these words that he was giving were given by one shepherd. You think about that. Solomon is wise, but he's inspired by God to write this. The proverbs that he has, all the things that Solomon comes up with and writes down is because God gave him the wisdom and the ability to do that. And you think of all the achievements we talked about in the early part of the book that he lists and he talks about. And Eric and I and Andrew had gone through and talked about all the different types of things that Solomon did. Solomon understands, though, that this is a gift of God. God gave him this gift. And Solomon is being taught by God and then turning around and trying to instruct us and help us along the way, too. If he understands that throughout his whole life, imagine how many things would have been different. I wonder maybe at times with him being the king, If that went to his head, he didn't need anybody. He was in charge. Um, it makes you wonder. I do like the use of shepherd there because it makes me think of Psalm 23, the beautiful psalm that his father David wrote. I almost wonder maybe if that might have been something that was on his mind at that time. Um, it's amazing to read through this and look at this, and I think it comes back once again. We've seen it mentioned a number of times. Creator, remember your creator. There's one shepherd. These are, like Andrew had said, you go back to Genesis, God identified as a creator. Shepherd, David identifies God as that in Psalm 23. And later on, obviously, way past Solomon, Jesus identifies himself as the good shepherd. So you have all these different references of God. He is the creator. Our very origin is with him. He is a shepherd in the sense we are sheep. He is guiding us along this path, wanting to help our every move and be there for us. And I think really what you're seeing here with Solomon, if I had to really sum it up in one word, it's kind of surrender here. He's allowing God to take control. And he's allowing God to dictate what he says and what he writes and how he lives. And he's allowing God in his life. And it's a very different tone than what we've seen throughout a lot of the book. Chapter 12 is a very different tone than the rest from the way I read it. You're starting to see, I think, like Andrew pointed out, and I'll hand it over to Eric. Andrew pointed out Solomon has this aha moment where he finally kind of wakes up one day and realizes it. We've seen kind of the build to it. And I almost wonder if a lot of it was like, really? Did I miss this? It was right in front of me this whole time. He's not learning anything new. I think he already knew this information. So I think it's important. What we say has direction, purpose, and meaning, and then that's ultimately guided by our shepherd, and we allow God to help us um, with our speech and our lives to direct people towards Him. We got Eric.
It's interesting to me that wise men and scholars are a little bit separated here in verse 11. Now, there can be some overlap with that, but the wise men are, they offer words that are like goads, and goads push you to where you're supposed to be. Nails keep you where you're supposed to be kept. And so, a scholar or master of the collection has a role, but also just your everyday wise man can have a role too. And sort of pushing you, if you're not in the right spot, pushing you to where you're supposed to be, but then also, nailing you down where you're supposed to be at. And that can be good, the security of nails, or we might even use like screws today. Because that almost reinforces the image a little bit more. So maybe even like a more modern idiom, something that holds you down a little bit better. And yeah, I mean, wisdom, somebody said before, truth is truth no matter the source. So if something's true, then it's true. And the Lord of all truth is the source of that truth. Even somebody who's a fool can say something that's right. And so cherish the things that are good and cherish the things that are valuable, and again, pay heed to the wisdom of our forebears. And then, verse 12 is kind of interesting to me. Of course, I write books, so, I read verse 12 and I'm like, okay, that's a little bit of I don't know. The way that I look at it is verse 12 is kind of like saying, make sure you live too. Make sure that you're not just in an armchair somewhere with your head buried in something. Make sure you're paying attention to what's happening around you. We might even say, although it's trivialized now, don't stare at your phone screen all day. Wake up and smell the flowers, and the roses and Folgers or whatever, whatever you want to smell, like smell whatever. Be present in life. God has blessed us with life, and so be present in life. It's not enough just to swallow up knowledge all day long. You got to live too. And you got to spend time applying that knowledge. You got to spend time bumping elbows with other people that God has created. You know, of course, there's people that are going to annoy you and perturb you, and you just want to slap them sometimes. But I'm sure Chris and Andrew feel that way about me sometimes. You know, I kind of want to goad me a little bit. But God made people, so spend time with them. You know, if you can't love the people that are around you, then you can't love God. Who you know, if you can't love the people that you see, then you can't love the God who is invisible um, to the naked eye. So, really good wisdom here, and again, taking us back to God. And the shepherding imagery definitely should not be lost on us, especially if this is Solomon, which it seems to be. His father was a shepherd, and he wrote extensively on the idea of shepherding. And even David, sort of the Davidic prophecies in relation to the Messiah, lots of elements of those prophecies that connect to the shepherding idea and God being the good shepherd. So, Andrew?
You know, God has blessed people with all kinds of wisdom, and they've written endless amount of books for us to enjoy and ponder in on, and that are valuable. I mean, books that we can learn from, you know, outside the Bible, that can help us in our day-to-day life. I mean, it's endless, and there needs to be a balance of how much time that we spend just seeking to fill our mind up with that, because we can do too much of that, and as it's been said, we can get lost and just trying to accumulate just knowledge. And we've said it over and over, seeking to understand, growing wisdom and knowledge is a good thing, but that's not supposed to be the only thing that we seek to do. We're supposed to build relationships with people. If you're stuck in and being a bookworm and that's all you do, made me think of just now, there was it was like the Twilight Zone episode. A guy just valued so much of reading his books. That's all he wanted to do, and he survived the apocalypse. And the thing was, at the end of he his glasses get broke. I mean, he could not read without his glasses, and so he loses his one valuable thing. That just popped in my mind. So another thing to hear that I find that sticks out is in verse 12. He says, "My son." Nowhere else that I've seen in this book that he references outside of in like chapter 1 of an audience, where he's directing his thoughts here in particular to an individual, just like he did or does often in Proverbs. But I like in verse 12 that there is a warning that it almost hints at we can get lost in worldly wisdom. Um, be careful about that. Uh, don't put too much, or I should say, don't put um, undue stock in what men say. Don't put them on a pedestal above God, certainly. Um, value what wise men have to offer. Value what direction they are given, as long as it lines with truth. That doesn't go against God. That's going to help you be a better servant, help you to do for others, think of others first before yourself, and valuing the little time that we have. We can get so lost in so many things. So this is something that additionally we have to be mindful of. Use your time wisely, always. That's a hard thing. It's something that we have to continue to work on. All right. Look at the final two verses, which sums up everything that Psalm has been building up to. Verses 13 and 14 read, the conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God, keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. We get a reality check here. And Solomon states it plain, the meaning of life. There's that question that people ask constantly, and what's the meaning of life? And Solomon lays it out here. Fear God and keep his commandments. Live for him. Do what he has said. Keeps it simple. We tend, speaking for myself, I tend to make things complicated. If I would just revere God, trust in him, focus in on my relationship with him, do what he has told me to do because he wants what's best for me. If I do that, everything will work out. Doesn't mean that life is going to be easy. Doesn't mean that there's not going to be difficulties throughout Scripture, especially with Jesus has said, and Paul, Peter, and the apostles, just over and over, we're told simply life is going to be tough. Rely on God. Look to him for the strength to endure. Because at the end of it, if you've done what he has said, if you respect God, see him as creator, see that he is Lord, he's in charge, live for him, recognize that, you will receive your eternal reward. And 14, he further makes it plain that we will have to make an accounting for what we have done and what we haven't done. And there's nothing that, for instance, if we're home alone, have the lights turned off, we're in a corner in the closet and think that nobody else could see what we're doing. God knows all. We can't think or deceive ourselves. I mean, that's what Satan wants us to believe, that somehow we can keep something a secret. No, God, just as in Psalm 139, perfect place, just goes through and describes perfectly that nothing is hidden from his sight. And it's a very sobering last two verses. It brings comfort. It also just it also may prick our hearts. It should. It should stir us to want to make changes where changes needed to be made. And it's great that someone, as we believe that Solomon wrote this, whom has done all kinds of things that would be contrary to God. You see that hope that change was made, that even somebody that has committed all kinds of sin can turn around, make those changes that are needed to be made, and can have that right relationship with God. And there's so many things that he would not want God to bring up, and thought that, well, thank goodness no one saw that. Well, of course, God saw that. And we should think, well, is this something God would want me to have done or do? But I know that I've said more than enough. Chris, what are your thoughts as we close in this section?
What's amazing, we've been going through 12 chapters trying to figure out the whole purpose and meaning of life. And the way the New King James says, verse 13 is to fear God, keep his commandments, for this is man's all. So, like, that's our whole purpose. Like, that's the whole meaning of life, is to respect God, have reverence for God, and keep God's commandments. That made me think of what Jesus said over in the Gospels. If you love me, you'll keep my commandments. So, loving God, respecting God, putting God in his rightful place leads you to find your purpose, leads you to find what the meaning of life is. And you study Jesus, you study him through the Gospels. I remember being a kid, I was always like, well, how in the world could you be perfect? Well, yeah, I don't know anybody that's perfect. How could you put on flesh and be perfect? Well, it's because he encapsulated verse 13. He had respect, he had reverence for his father, and he kept his father's commandments. There was no identity crisis with Jesus. Jesus wasn't like, why am I here? What's my purpose? What's the meaning of life? He knew his mission, he knew why he was here, and he always involved his father in everything he did. And I almost wonder if Solomon writes that and sits back and thinks, back to the beginning of chapter 12, remember your creator in the days of your youth. If I only would have done this. It's that simple. And it's funny, we read that. It's so simple, but it's so hard to do that for some reason. It's so hard to put God in his proper place at times. It's so hard to follow the commandments of God. But once you begin to understand who God is and what God's done for you, it's so easy to respect God. It's so easy to be reverent of God. So easy to love God. And a part of that comes back to keeping his commandments. I love you because of what you've done for me. It's not, oh, I've got to check this box to do this. But I know that you really want what's best for me. So I'm going to do this because truly everything comes from you. You're the most important person in my life. My very origin comes from you. And then, like Andrew pointed out in verse 14, I think depending on where you are in your life today, that could be a terrifying thing to think about. Verse 14, God bringing every work into judgment. And to me, verse 13 is probably one of the more famous passages. Verse 14 is oftentimes left out. If I respect God and fear God, I don't fear judgment. I'm not scared of judgment day. I'm not scared of standing before God. But if my respect and reverence of God's not where it should be, the idea of judgment day should absolutely terrify me. I should be terrified to stand before God, because I may not be right with him. But if I love him and respect him, keep his commandments, I look forward to that day. I long for that day. Younger Solomon, if he heard a lesson like this, he may be scared. He may be concerned. He may be worried. But I think as he got older, he began to see disappointments coming. The scriptures talk about it in the New Testament. It's appointed man to die once. After that comes judgment. That appointment's coming. You can't skip it. You can't get out of it. This book really causes you to reflect on that. What will God have to say when I stand before him? Enter in, good and faithful servant, or depart from me, I never knew you. That's relying on what I do with God, how I respond to God, how I view God, and how I live my life in response to all he's done for me. So, really appreciate Solomon, really appreciate his words, appreciate his good and bad example too. And it gives us a lot to think about. What you got, Eric?
I'll be brief because I think you guys did a good job covering that. This is relevant to everybody. This is relevant to a rich person. It's relevant to a poor person. It's relevant to a celebrity. It's relevant to a no-name anybody. So this is something that is for everybody and applies to everybody, no matter what position you find yourself in life, no matter what talents you have, no matter what money you have, no matter what education you have. Anybody can serve God. I know that that's a big part of Chris's preaching in particular, that anybody can serve, anybody can pitch in. I think it should be a big part of anybody's preaching. And 14, you think of, I get the vision of like an attorney who's bringing every scrap of paper that has any bearing on the case to light, and is making the best case possible. Now, if you are viewing, um, I guess if you're the defendant in the case, and that's the prosecutor, then that's a terrifying idea. But if you're the defendant, and this is the defense attorney who's standing next to you, the advocate for you, standing next to you, then that's a comforting idea that God has not overlooked anything. And that's kind of the image that you have in the New Testament, both for the Holy Spirit and for Jesus, is this term of a paraclete, an advocate, somebody who's going to stand next to you in the judgment, and is going to make sure that all things are known, that not a hair of your head is unknown, not a star in the sky is unknown to God, and that everything is brought to light. We should not get the vision of like a scale, making sure that you can tip the scales. You've got 80,001 good things, and you've got, just 80,000 bad things. So the scales tip in your favor. You don't think of it that way. You think of it in the sense of God knowing all things and bringing all things to light. And I'm not sure if Chris had mentioned it, but Hebrews 4:13 teaches the same exact thing. I know that he was kind of saying some things along those lines. But there's not a single thing that evades God's notice or evades his glance. And that can be a comforting thought for God's people. And just make sure that you're God's person, and make sure that you are a child of God. Anybody has access to that relationship. And it's very, very simple. And I'm sure Chris, myself, or Andrew would be more than happy to walk you all through it. Anybody who's interested in becoming a child of God. Um, the great thing is that we have an intercessor, and we have somebody who compensates for our weaknesses, because we all have them. And we all have these stupid things that we do, and stupid things that we're tempted by, and stupid things that we give into, even though we know we should be doing better. And Ecclesiastes, again, is a great book, helping us to maintain perspective and focus on the good things of life, and also being aware of some of the exceptions that come along, and how to cope with those exceptions. The race is not always to the fastest. The race is not always to the person who's put in the most time. And so how do we cope with those sorts of things? And we cope with those sorts of things with the wisdom that God gives us, the wisdom that transcends earthly wisdom. As per our Bible reading last night, for our family Bible reading, we read from James chapter 3, and the ending of James 3, verses 13 through 18 contrasts godly wisdom and sensual, earthly, demonic wisdom. So that'd be another good parallel for this. It's been a good discussion, guys.
And just as we close, this is something that is very important, that Solomon, if he found this later on in life, as we may tend to think that he just had this clarity that was finally received to him, this wake-up call. As long as it's done before we close our eyes and draw our last breath, and make things right, that's what's important. I mean, better done sooner than later. And we just hope that, as we stress at the close of any of these videos, and really throughout, hopefully just directing ourselves and you to be on that narrow path, to be on that path that is directed by God and his word, directed by truth. Satan and his forces are continuing to work to trip people up, to cause people to stumble. And we just encourage, don't listen to him. Make sure that you are in the word of truth, because that's going to keep you on that path. That's going to lead to heaven. And we can't begin to fathom just how wonderful heaven will be for those that are going to be welcomed into that for all eternity. We can't even begin to fathom how horrible for all eternity it will be for those that are be turned away when they're told by the Lord, saying, "Depart from me. I know you not. I never knew you." And especially for those that claim to have known him. Because Jesus says there are going to be people on that day that is going to say, "Lord, Lord." They're going to say, like, "Hey, we did do work for you." And he's going to say, "No, you didn't. You didn't obey my commandments." And how horrible it'll be for them, just thinking about they thought a right relationship, but they're going to say, or they're going to be told, "Depart." And they're going to spend eternally separated from God. And we're just relaying what God's word has spoken. And we encourage you, look into God's word, see what we have said, and make sure it aligns with Scripture. As what we have sought to do is accurately handle the word of truth. And we hope that we are doing this. We hope that we're bringing praise and honor and glory to him. We hope that we are stirring you up and encouraging you to do what God has done, to fear him and to keep his commandments, to bear fruit and to be fruitful for his kingdom. So he desires all to be saved. He wants none to perish. He finds no delight in those that perish, that are wicked. And let us not be perishing. Let us live in such a way where when it is our time to draw our final breath, when our spirit returns to God, and when it comes for our time to be judged, that we will be welcomed into heaven. And so please reach out to us. Reach out to us if you have questions, if you want to talk further about what the Bible has to say. And we just want to make sure that we are all doing what God is pleased with. And so you can find Chris at the Shively Church of Christ Facebook page, Erica or myself at Taylorsville Road Church of Christ Facebook page, or at TaylorsvilleRDChurchofChrist.com. And Lord willing, we will be having a new study. Do you think I should reveal what we're going to talk about, or just spring the surprise on them when we convene next time? What do y'all think?
That's a surprise. I like a little surprise, a little spice in life.
You okay with that, Chris? Just leave it to be surprised?
Yeah, leave people on a cliffhanger.
All right. Well, that sounds good. But please look forward to, Lord willing, when we have a new Bible study start up next week, Lord willing, of Three Guys in the Word. But until then, may God bless you and take care.